I just decided I'm
Says
recording out
a
to the
record.
cloud, wherever that cloud may be.
So it's just doing it.
It says recording. Everyone hope is okay with that. We're trying to experiment to see if those who are not able to make the morning class, if they'd like to see a recording, because the evening class is not being continued. Also, I suppose people might otherwise not make the class. So it does say on the top left of my screen, it says
Record.
recording, and there's a little cloud with a red dot inside it.
Yeah.
Do you have that on your screens as well?
Yes.
Yes.
Now, which cloud that is anyone's guess.
Well, I would imagine it's going to the FLJC account somewheres.
Okay, they have a cloud.
Um,
No. Okay,
Yeah.
we'll find out.
if it's raining when we get back, it's
If it starts raining,
cloud.
we'll know. Yeah. All right. I think I actually I remember sometime within the last few years I did once try recording it. I think it worked, but let's see what happens at the end of the maybe at the end of the class it will tell me. But we'll see what happens. Okay, we're recording. Let's see. Okay, so let me share the screen. Share screen and go to there. Okay, are we all on the screen share now? Do you see the text? Maybe I should make that a little bigger. Oops, trying to do something here. Oops, no, something I didn't want to do. There. Yeah, did that make it a little bit bigger?
Yeah,
Okay. Okay. We're sharing, recording.
you're doing everything.
Just really fooling around here with the computers. Okay, so let us actually begin. We're talking about the issue of individual conscience and warfare. There are several questions, larger and individual questions. As we pointed out, and there'll be a couple of texts, interestingly enough, that on this Pardeso worksheet they put on about warfare. And we certainly can easily say, without question, that Judaism is not a religion that requires pacifism, as some religions do. Certainly, Quakers, I suppose, are one of the most well-known ones in the United States, and some of the Eastern religions as well. And after we'll take a quick look at that. Then the second issue, which we did speak about a little bit some months ago, almost a year ago, about the question of Judaism and warfare and what types, and there is a tradition of distinguishing between types of wars, a required war, a discretionary war, a commanded war. We'll take a look at that. And then the larger issue will be, of course, the issue of individual conscience. How does conscience figure into this question of both going to war and serving in war? And we'll see there are some differences of opinions about that issue. And then we'll take also a look at both the very practical times when these issues were being discussed. One, the Vietnam War, which I think most of you sitting here will remember. And we'll also take a look at that issue. Well, what about in the state of Israel today, which one might argue has a different issue. The larger question is, should the state allow for the individual conscience to object either to all wars or to certain wars? And how does that figure? Okay, so that's where we're going. Questions before we begin? Okay, it's a little. I will admit, after we just what can we say, commemorated 1 year since October 7th, that we're talking about this, this war that we It's continuing war, unfortunately, but necessary. Okay, so last things we looked at, we did look at some of these sources. Let's go back a little bit about war and about Maurice Lamb. Well, let's go back to that for a second. We'll see a little bit more from him. Pacifism absolutizes the concept of peace. There is no value considered absolute. Only God is absolute. Pacifism is the idolizing of peace. If nothing is worth fighting for, if everything must be subordinated to peace, then peace is an absolute. And this is interesting what he says, an idol. If a man says, I will sue for peace regardless of the circumstances, and thereby increases the possibility of losing justice and freedom, which took thousands of years of history to produce and refine. If a man is willing to sacrifice religion and equality and liberty and homeland for the sake of physical survival, then he has made of peace, and with the D should be not there, insatiable satanic idol. In a sense, the pacifist is a perfectionist who does not wish to see the imperfect world as it really is. Now, the pacifism is correct when he affirms the world ought to be pacific, that war is horror. But he cannot assume that the world, therefore, is ready for pacifism or that it can become pacifistic merely by wishing it so. He betrays a naive faith in the automatic upward progress of society, which especially in the past 50 years, and he's writing this in 1970. Notice he's writing this after the war. Another look at pacifism and selective conscientious objection very clearly in reference to the war in Vietnam. Especially in the past 50 years, has not made notable moral progress. Human aggression will not disappear for wanting of it to disappear. That is the reality, unfortunate but true. Okay, now Norman Lamb is a very distinguished modern Orthodox scholar associated with the synagogue in Manhattan and with the Yeshiva University, clearly arguing that that's all, pacifism is all very nice, but there are consequences. And when you think about pacifism and making it an idol, an absolute, the consequence is that there will be some very horrific wars which will not be appropriately opposed. Okay. Comments, questions about this text? Do you think he's right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we did look at Mahatma Gandhi, who really talked in 1938 about his nonviolence, and that might be applicable to Germany, the Jews of Germany, and how that Martin Buber made the point that this is just this is not going to work. And then interestingly, they gave a speech from Winston Churchill about fighting. And now this is from Barack Obama. Now, he got the Nobel Peace Prize. Now, a lot of people thought that was a little bit premature, right? He got it fairly early in his term as president. And some people said, well, maybe he could have done more to deserve it, but he did receive it. And he made this, he made a comment, interesting comments about, remember, he's receiving a peace prize. We must begin by acknowledging the hard truth. We will not eradicate violent conflict in our lifetimes. I would just point out that in our lifetimes is a rather short historical period. There will be times when nations acting individually or in concert will find the use of force not only necessary, but morally justified. I make this statement mindful of what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said in this same ceremony years ago. Violence never brings permanent peace. It solves no social problem. It merely creates new and more complicated ones. Okay. I know there's nothing weak, nothing passive, nothing naive in the creed and lives of Gandhi and King, right? We should make the point that, right, just because they were pacifists doesn't mean that they were passive. They were both very clearly actively involved in advocating for their positions. But as a head of state sworn to protect and defend my nation, I cannot be guided by their examples alone. I face the world as it is, and I cannot stand idle in face of the threats to the American people. For make no mistake, evil does exist in the world. A nonviolent movement could not have halted Hitler's armies. Negotiations could not convince al-Qaeda's leaders to lay down their arms. Say the same of perhaps Hezbollah and Hamas. To say that force may sometimes be necessary is not a call to cynicism. It is a recognition of history, the imperfections of man, and the limits of reason. Is he right? He says this almost 23 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And what have we seen since?
Right.
Well, certainly we talk about the last few years with Israel, but there have been other wars, and there are unfortunately several still occurring right now. I know evil does exist, and how do you stop it? And finally, interestingly enough, we have Machiavelli, who you might find odd to see in a source sheet about Jewish sources about peace, but he's going to make the points similar to what has been made before. And I have to tell you, I have not read Machiavelli's The Prince. It's often people will. It's become an eponym. It's used in our language. How we can live is so far removed from how we ought to live that he who abandons what is done for what ought to be done will rather learn to bring about his own destruction rather than its preservation. For a man who wishes to profess goodness at all times must fall to ruin among so many who are not good, whereby it is necessary for a prince who wishes to maintain its position to learn how not to be good. The point he's making is that there's real evil in the world, and if you don't recognize that, you're in trouble, and sometimes you have to learn how to fight it. And I like that last sentence, learn how not to be good. And one more from him. Men must either be caressed or annihilated. They will revenge themselves for small injuries, but cannot do so for great ones. The injuries, therefore, that we do to a man must be such that we do not fear his vengeance. These cruelties can be considered well used if it is permissible to say the good about the bad, that are performed all at once and are not continued. Badly used, these cruelties, and it's talking about war and physical violence, that although at first they are few, increase with time rather than disappear. Injuries then should be inflicted all at once, for the less they are tasted, the less they offend. Clearly arguing that if there's some evil, you should stop it rather, because they're only going to get worse. Okay. Again, questions or comments? Finally, last one we're going to look about on this for now. Professor David Blumenthal, in conversation with Michael Chester, Abraham Joshua Heschel was not a pacifist. He certainly would have favored participation in the Second World War. He just believed that what was going on in Vietnam was wrong. And that brought up the whole question of selective conscientious objection. Here's that question. If you believe that certain wars are wrong, but not all wars are wrong, is the government or the ethical system you have allow for those who believe that to be exempt from being in part of the armed forces? Okay, selective, which was highly debated in Jewish circles. We will take a look at that in a little while. Though legitimate in Christian circles, it was a very difficult position to defend in Jewish circles, but Heschel believed in it and defended it. What is he defending? The idea that no, we're not absolute pacifists, but we could, in good conscience, object to certain conflicts. And obviously, he was thinking very specifically during the Vietnam War period. In other words, can a Jew be a conscientious objector? Or if a Jew is a conscientious objector, did he have to object to all wars, or could he just object to the Vietnam War? Right? I don't know if any of you remember those issues being debated. Perhaps not. We'll take a closer look at that. Those issues were debated, and we're going to take a look at them in a little while. Okay, before we end here, okay. So let us take a look at, so what's the next one? Oh, the Kimmelman article. Okay. Share the screen. Oh, actually, we have to go back there. Oh, going back to the, oh no, that's not here. Sorry. Stop share. Okay, start share. Wait a sec. Sorry, I thought I brought that article up. I'm gonna have to go back and I have to open it up. Okay. That should be there. So I should be able to now share the screen. Here it is. Got it. Okay. So this is an article that was written around the time of the Vietnam War. I don't know if I have the exact date at the bottom. Let's take a look. Okay, 1987, later in the Vietnam War. Written by a member of the Rabbinical Assembly. We've seen Reuven Kimmelman. We've seen some of his articles before in this class. Very well-known scholar. And he wrote exemptions for military service in Judaism. We do have exemptions. We just read about it in the Torah not too many weeks ago, right? And he talks about okay. Jewish political theory has made provisions for minority rights. Do such provisions also apply in war? Presumably not. Apparently, once the proper procedure has been complied with, the individual has no recourse but to fight. If the duly constituted authorities have determined the necessity of war, who is the individual to review the government's decision? That's a larger question. If the government says our country is going to war, can an individual say, no, you can't, or I refuse to fight? And there are different types of war. Moreover, if it is a defensive war, how can anyone be exempt from the obligation of self-defense, the duty to rescue others, and the need to come to the defense of the state whose very existence shields all? All right. There are different types of warfare. Just point out that there are obligatory wars and discretionary wars. Obligatory wars, such as someone attacks you, you have to defend yourself, or the obligatory war in the Bible. Discretionary wars might be to extend the government's powers or its sovereignty. Okay, so he now is going to quote from some of the biblical. So we'll take a closer look at that a little bit later. Deuteronomy. The officials address the troops. Is there anyone who has built a new house but has not dedicated it, or planted a vineyard but has not harvested it, or spoken for a woman in marriage but has not married her? Let him go back, lest he die and another do it. The officials go on addressing the troops and say, is there anyone afraid and tender-hearted? Let him go back to his home, lest the courage of his comrades flag like his. Okay. So why are these people exempt? What's the principle here? And they were the first three, and then there's the number 4. Why are these first 3 people exempt? Anyone? Do they make sense? Do you think these are sensible exemptions?
I don't think so.
Why not?
What does building a house have to do with war?
Okay. You built a house, but you haven't dedicated it. Why should that make you exempt from warfare? Okay, you could argue that. What about you've become engaged, but you haven't gotten married yet?
There were many people who were engaged and went to war and died.
Hmm? So the question is, therefore, the Torah is saying we don't want that to happen. Of course, what's the danger with that, by the way?
Everyone gets married.
Or doesn't even get married. Everyone gets engaged. Right? If you don't like the war that's being if the government has said we have to go to war, I'll just get engaged. And I'll get married after the war. Then after the war, you break the engagement. Oh, gee, that didn't work.
Well, this may have applied in biblical times, but certainly not in current times,
Why is that?
Boy.
because it doesn't happen that way anymore.
I mean, people break engagements.
I mean the actual 3 points here, not just engagement.
Oh, okay, all right, right. In other words, some of these don't apply today because you build a house. I didn't put up the mezuzot yet. I built the house, but I haven't put up the mezuzot yet. So I can't go to war. I've ordered them from the scribe, and it's taking a long time to make to write them. So I can't go to war. Or I really want a special type of mezuzah, and it's out of stock, so I can't put them up.
Don't
Right.
think the draft board would have gone for that.
No, nowadays you don't think so. Okay. But let's at least think conceptually, and we're going to talk about this a bit. Conceptually, what's the issue that the Bible is concerned with? Some action that does involve a level of holiness has commenced in part, but hasn't been finished, right? You started something and you didn't finish it. Now, which particular actions, it's interesting. We see if we can compare today's society with a biblical society and with the way the Bible works, but certainly the concept is you started an action, there's a holy aspect to it when you complete it, and you haven't completed it yet. By the way, there's a lot of other questions you could ask. How long are you exempt for? I mean, if you built, like I said, gee, I just can't get that mezuzah for my house. I'm just still waiting here for the mailman, and it's been months and months, and he still isn't here. So it's an interesting question. How long are these going to be, right? Are they forever? Another thing, what type of exemptions don't we see here?
Versus individual conscience.
Well, that's an interesting question. Great, because we have something here that says, is there anyone afraid and tender-hearted? Now, we're going to see the debate here. Based upon just the translation we have here, and the way we'll see there's some difference of opinion, but it looks like, who is this talking about? How would you define that tender-hearted and afraid person?
Conscientious objector.
Maybe. Okay, you could call him a conscientious objector. You might, again, remember when the rabbis read the Bible, and when we're going to follow that same pattern, when we read the Bible, are they talking about one person or two people? I.e., are they talking about fearful people? That's a different category than, quote, tender-hearted. All right. You might say there are two groups of people the Torah is talking about. The main concern of the Torah is the efficiency of the army. If you have people who are not going to fight amongst your soldiers, that affects the entire morale and success of your military operation, right? And exactly who they are. In classic biblical works, we see it's not always 100% clear. Is this a coward? Is it a person who is a conscientious objector? Is it an absolute pacifist? Is it a selective pacifist? And how do you know for sure? Right? So,
Did you ever see the movie Hacksaw Ridge?
no.
It was about a conscientious objector in World War II that wanted to serve as a medic, and he wound up in an infantry battalion. They almost threw him out, all this stuff, but he actually saved about 70 or 80 people's lives, bringing them off a ridge as a medic, and never touched the rifle. So he was
Right.
not afraid, but he would not touch a rifle.
Now, we'll get to this later, but well, spoiler alerts here. Conscientious objectors in the United States Army, United States military forces, are asked, would you serve as a medic? That's the standard question that is asked for someone to become a conscientious objector. If they say yes, then yes, as in that example. You can be trained as a medic and not be someone who actually is involved with weapons. That's an interesting question. We will get to that. But the question, notice the wording that we have here, which is a little unclear. And as we'll see, there'll be some midrash and some modern, right? And he goes on. Individuals in these categories are required to report for duty first before being assigned alternative service. Alternative service. That's also something we have in the United States, which I will talk about. There is another category which not only is exempt from reporting for duty, but is also excused from all alternative service, such as provisions, weapon supply, road repair, special security expenditures, or even oversight of defensive installations. In other words, right, you could say, okay, you're not going to go in the Army, but you got to fix the roads. You got to be on this. You're not going to be killing anybody. You're not going to get trained with weapons, but there are things that you could do, both possibly in the back, at behind the lines of war, or out of the military area that is helping the nation in some way, right? Okay. This category derives from the verse, when a man has taken a bride, he shall not go out with the army or be assigned for any purpose. He shall be exempt 1 year for the sake of his household to give happiness to the woman he has married. Again, that's really, I mean, you may, I probably, for various reasons, am much more familiar with this than the military. The military during the Vietnam War in the United States did not need all the men becoming 18 every year. Too many. So they had to make decisions. So, for example, in the United States, they had exemptions for college students, right? While you were a full-time college student, you were exempt. At one point, there was a question of if you had children and you had if you had dependents, you could be exempt. So there are different ways in which exemptions could work. All right, Carol. Good morning. Are you there, Carol?
Yes, I just got power. We had an.
Oh, sorry. Sorry. Was the storm? Were those storms hitting your area?
No, just.
Oh, just a power outage. Okay, well, you can be one of our first to check the this is being recorded. With any luck, we will find out where that is, and you could watch the first half. Okay,
Okay, thank you.
we're working on that.
I found out where it is. It's actually on your login page, but Thorin would have to post it somewhere.
When you say login page for the individual to the FLJC.
No, for your
Where I log into Zoom.
your login page, there's a separate column on the top it says meetings and the other one says recorded meetings. And when you click on recorded meetings, you can get to the recording. And
Okay, and I can move it to a different place.
well, we have that, Thorin has to move it.
Okay, I'll get in touch with Thorin. Okay.
Yeah.
Which
So
source-
Carol, we may be able to get that to you. We'll see.
Okay, thank
Okay.
you. Which source are we using now, please?
This is the Ruvain Kimmelman article called Exemptions.
Okay, I have that. Thank you.
Exemptions from military service. We're on page 2. Okay. So we have certain exemptions, right? People who started some sort of holy activity, building a house, planting a vineyard, being engaged, but haven't completed it. And then we have these other exemptions, and some of those exemptions seem to would last a year. This other exemption, which I'm not 100% sure about it, about these people who are, let's go back. Where are we? Yes, afraid and tender-hearted. We'll see what that means as we go along. Okay. According to the Mishnah, the absolute exemption of for 1 year for one who has consummated his marriage. In other words, now we're talking differently. Now, on the one hand, we have the ones who are engaged but aren't yet married, but now we have the ones who just married. Okay, those who have just married have 1 year exemption. Also apply to one who has built his house. In other words, the rabbis also take the idea that there is a year after you've completed this action where you're also exempt. All the exemptions are characterized by the universal axis. There are no exemptions based on birth, education, college students, professional class. Oh, you mean clergy people? Or some other professional class? Not even on religious status. This fits the moral purpose of conscription, which is to universalize or randomize the risks of war across a generation of men. By the way, talking about men, which was of that time, and still even today, I think the government hasn't decided on drafting women. By not creating a special exclusion, even for religion, the Torah understands that when life is at stake, there can be no respecting of persons. The purpose of all these exemptions is not made explicit. The most prominent seems to be they speak to remove from the field those who cannot concentrate on the battle. I'm engaged. I'm thinking about my fiance. We're going to get married. Or I built my house and I didn't put up the mezuzot, and I'm worried about it. And I planted a vineyard and I haven't consecrated, and it's just on my mind. The presence of such people increases fatalities and resulting from disarray and failure of nerve. Okay, that could be part of this question. Why are interrupted actions basis for exemptions? Other suggestions include the need to mitigate individual hardship, to give courage to those who remain, right? If somebody's not focusing on the battle, the morale of the entire unit can be affected, to maintain the sanctity of the camp, or to prevent depopulation of urban areas. Okay. At any rate, okay, so we have the economic, the familial, the psycho-moral. I'm not sure why Reuven Kelman says the physical. I don't see what he's talking about. I certainly understand the others. Claims for economic and familial exemptions are subject to substantiation. The others are self-evident. Here's this question he's going to talk about. Afraid and tender-hearted. Unclear from the Torah itself exactly what are they talking about. Are they talking about the same person, two different types of people? Is it the same reason that they won't fight and affect the morale? Rabbi Akiva, afraid means fearful of war. Tender-hearted means compassionate, apprehensive lest he kill. Taken together, there would be grounds for exempting. Now here Rabbi Kimmelman is trying to say, what do these two phrases mean? Afraid and tender-hearted. He's saying the afraid means the psychologically timid, lack of courage, I don't perhaps, and the morally scrupulous, which is where we might go in the direction of a conscientious objector, as we would call it today. Besides having to be substantiated, the economic and familial exemptions share another common denominator, okay? Projects such as starting a house, beginning a vineyard, or getting engaged mostly affect men in their prime, which is precisely the age of maximum combat readiness. In other words, the exemptions are taking out of the army the best soldiers. A large number of exemptions for this age group can so hamper mobilization efforts as to impair the military effort. Imagine that. If it was very easy to get out of being in the, oh gee, I'm going to start building a house tomorrow. Oh, I'm planting my vineyard. Oh, you know what? I'm getting engaged. Yeah, I really don't want to marry this woman, but I'll get engaged. And then I'm out. Okay. Nachmanides, Ramban, says, were it not for the requirement of substantiation. Here he's adding to something which the Bible does not say. I want to see a picture of that house and the contracts with all your contractors. Or I need to know more about your vineyard. Or I'm going to interview this woman you say you're engaged to. We need substantiation here. A majority of people would seek exemption on false pretenses. Nachmanides' fears were borne out by the experience of the biblical judge Gideon, who, upon making provisions for the psychomoral exemption, lost 2/3 of his fighting forces. And by the way, I should point out, during the Vietnam War, there were certain psychiatrists whose letters to draft boards were not recognized. I could tell you from very specifically have some experience in this. I remember at that time, I was a draft counselor. I advised young men about the draft during the time of the Vietnam War, and I knew the names of the doctors whose letters simply were worthless because they would exempt anyone by writing a letter to the draft board that this person was psychologically unfit to serve. Was there a lot of that going on? Yes, there was, both on physical and mental parts of the exemption process, the 4F, as it was called. Okay. But it's precisely the point. There is a loophole in the war legislation, a loophole so gaping that it allows those not convinced of the validity of the war to reassert their sovereignty through legal shenanigans, right? Oh, you mean people can not be honest about this? Doubts about the validity of the war will stir up their own social momentum and induce many to seek wholesale exemptions, as did happen in the Vietnam War in the United States. The result is a war declared by the executive, approved by the Sanhedrin, which sputters for failing to persuade the populace of its necessity. It's an interesting question, which we'll see in some other text. The idea of there is a standard by which, shall we say, the conscience of the nation must be in agreement for the necessity of the war, because if the, quote, conscience of the nation does not agree for the necessity of the war, then you have a situation where you just can't pursue it. Okay. Mobilization cannot succeed without a high degree of popular motivation. Many will express their half-heartedness by dragging their feet of open being, as the Talmud said, the last to go to war and the first to return. Isn't that what you would want to be, right? By expressing their reluctance to fight, the populace retains a semblance of sovereignty. So here Kimmelman is saying these exemptions also are a valve that can control the ability of the government to actually pursue the war, and indirectly passes judgment on whether the military venture is both necessary and serves legitimate political ends. The upshot is that mandatory and discretionary wars both require a moral and political base. Otherwise, the war threatens to be undetermined by the morale of that community, which constitutes the resource of power. David Ben-Gurion summed it up. He said, 2/3 of military prowess is popular morale. If you read the editorial in the New York Times yesterday by Thomas Friedman, he makes that point very explicitly with the state of Israel. He's saying that there are internal issues that are ultimately just as important for Israel as the armaments. And unless those internal issues can be, if those internal issues can be solved, then Israel is very strong. But the pursuit of the war is hampered unless the internal issues, which interested by pure coincidence, Kimmelman is talking about here, and he sees it is a fascinating question. So he's saying that those exemptions are the safety valve. Those exemptions give the people of conscience, well, a way out without necessarily being convinced that pacifism or selective pacifism is correct. And it really isn't a judgment on the question of pacifism or selective pacifism. It is a question of the judgment of the populace over the correctness of the war. Okay? Questions or comments?
I have a friend who was a conscientious objector during the Vietnam War. He did alternate service at New York City Department of Welfare.
Yeah. By the way, okay, spoiler alert. As so was I. I did alternative service. And I'll talk about that a little bit when we get to that to that question of Vietnam War and how that all worked out. That's why I have a lot of information and knowledge about this. Unfortunately, I got rid of my files. Hey, it's a long time ago, but I will talk when we get to that issue of conscientious objection during Vietnam from a very personal perspective as well. Okay. Any other comments on this text? Right. So I'm going to be going back and forth. A lot of the articles that we look at when they talk about warfare and conscientious objectives, I'm going to admit this, they do cover some of the same territory. So we will be looking at some of the things we looked at in Kimmelman. We'll look at some of the same text, either with a slightly different perspective or with greater depth. So I know there's going to be some repetition, but it's hard to pull out a sentence here and pull out a sentence there and pull out a sentence there and make that all work together. That's frankly, unfortunately, I just couldn't do that. Okay, so let's go on to which one do we want? Okay, so yeah, let's take a look at those. Oh, we just looked at that. I'm afraid. Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't open. I gotta go back and open the. I thought before the class I had opened the text. So we're gonna open a text file. Open, browse. Okay. Yeah, okay. I just opened the text and now we'll be able to share it in a moment. Where are we? Oops. Yeah, oops, there we're not. What's going on here? Sorry. No, not there. Oh, there it is. There we go. Sorry. Cancel that. Okay, let's share the screen. So let's actually here. There we go. Okay. So we're gonna sort of step back, but it'll step perhaps a little bit deeper into some of these texts to see what Kimmelman was talking about. Okay. This is the source sheet that says traditional sources. Okay, this has got the English and the Hebrew. Okay, so notice, first of all, that when we talk about the exemptions, the army is there. With some exemptions, we're not talking about you sit at home and make the exemptions, but you literally have to go with the army and just before the battle begins, right? The Kohen, the priest, says, Hero Israel, you are about to join battle with your enemy. Let not your courage falter. It's interesting, the terminology, Al Yirach Livavchem, Al Tira'u. Remember, we're talking about the person who has tender-hearted or fearful. The Kohen who is approaching the troops before the battle begins is very specifically using the exact same words of that exemption and saying to the troops, you shouldn't be that way. But later on, a recognition that even though it's one thing for the Kohen to say that, still there are people like that, okay? And there's your guard who marches with you. Okay. Then the officials, Hashotrim, said, now we have those exemptions. Anyone who's built a house, not dedicated it, let him go back to his home lest he die in battle, planted a vineyard, paid the bride price for a wife, but is not taking her to a household. And then we have El Ha'amru, Ha'ish Hayare Verach Halevav. Okay. Who is afraid and disheartened, tender. That's an interesting question. What this term means. Virach halevav. Now, this is being translated here as tender-hearted. It's I'm sorry, yeah, disheartened. The question is, yeah, there's a difference, right? Disheartened versus tender-hearted. Tender-hearted, we might understand, is a positive issue of conscience. Disheartened suggests more of a lack of courage, right? So there's an interesting question of how do you translate it and what are they really talking about? So for that, we sometimes have to look at some of the commentaries, okay? Okay. Now, again, this question about those first three, you built the house, or you planted the vineyard, or you were engaged. Now, the halakha is if you built a house and inaugurated it, what about if you built a house and you did consecrate it, or you had the vineyard and you did use it, or you were engaged and you got married? Are you still exempt? And interestingly enough, since his wife needs him 12 months, in other words, since in a different part of the Torah, it says that if you get married, you have a 12-month exemption, they actually say not only for the wife, but for all of these, if you complete the action, you still get 12 months off. It's not maternity leave. It's, I don't know, it's some type of leave which you get. Interesting in the Talmud. Okay. All those mentioned, those three that we had, right, with the house and the vineyard and the wife, remain unoccupied in town, do not pay city taxes, do not provide food and water, nor improve the roads, as it is said, nor should anything be imposed upon him, but it may be imposed on others. No alternative service. This is a full exemption for that year for all of them. It's interesting this question of alternative service is raised, okay? Now, here's the question. Who are fearful and faint-hearted? One explanation. Rabbi Yossi, he talks about specifics, what he thinks the fearful and faint-hearted is. The fearful and faint-hearted, he's saying, are people who have committed a sin, have married someone they should not have married. A widow for the high priest, a divorcee, one having her feet chalitza, that's a woman whose husband died, but who is required to marry her brother-in-law or have a special procedure so she doesn't have to. A bastard or a Gibeonite girl for an Israelite, all without going into detail. What is Rabbi Yossi saying? If you've committed a sin, that's the people who are fearful and faint-hearted, not the tender-hearted, not the coward, not the conscientious objector. Why are you fearful? Because you've committed a sin, And what happens to sinners when they go into battle? God punishes them by dying, right? So if you've committed a sin, then you are especially fearful of going into battle because we know you're going to die because you have not done teshuvah, you have not repented for your sin, you are guilty before God, and you walk into the battle, zap. So here's an interesting way in which one rabbi is trying to read this question, which again, remember in the Talmud, in the Bible, it just says fearful and faint-hearted, whatever that is. In this interpretation, it's sinners. Sinners who have not either repented or are unrepentant for whatever reason. They're going to die. Okay? So he is eliminating from this discussion the question of either conscientious objection or cowardice or, again, disheartened or tenderheartedness. No, that's not what it's about. It's about sinners. Okay? Comment on that or question on that? Is this pushing it a bit far?
No, it's pretty interesting.
Okay.
Looking at it that way, that means probably nobody would go to war.
Or you have to declare war the day after Yom Kippur, right? You're going to assume at that point we're all repentant, right? Okay, sorry, can't declare war yet till after Yom Kippur. Right. Also, by the way, it eliminates the idea of conscientious objection. If we base our understanding of conscientious objection on those verses, he's just eliminated it, right? And by the way, there's this wonderful little explanation that goes further, which is, I actually really like this one. Concerning this, it is taught in our rabbinic material. If one spoke between donning the tefillin of the arm and the tefillin of the head, he has a sin. In other words, when you put on your tefillin, you're supposed to put on your one set, you put on the tefillin on the arm, right? Then you put on the tefillin on the head, and then you finish wrapping your hand. You're not supposed to converse or speak during the time period that you start putting on the tefillin until you're finished, okay? That's the rule. Well, if you do that, he has a sin. And due to that sin, he returns from the ranks of soldiers waging war. Why? This is referring to the preparation for war when the office is announced. What man is there who is fearful and faint-hearted? Let him go and return to his house. The sages explain that this is referring to one who is fearful due to his transgressions. Now, when I found this text, it's fascinating for several reasons. One, come on now, how big a sin is that? Really? I mean, this is not committing adultery, This is not bribery. This is one could argue, right? So the rabbis are in the mindset, and I mean, I may be making this a little humorous, but the rabbis are in a mindset that we have to take all the mitzvot very seriously, and a little sin really counts, right? It's just, I mean, of all the sins they could have taken for the example in this Baraita, why did they take this particular example? I think actually there are two reasons. Reason one is to say, even a minor sin, you might feel that. And by the way, people sometimes do feel great guilt, even for a minor sin, right? I mean, we can't judge how guilty people feel. Some people feel no guilt. Some people do major sins and don't feel any guilt, right? And some people can do a minor sin and feel great guilt. So to me, it's such a fascinating that of all the examples in the world that they could have chosen, it's not the guy who eats a cheeseburger. It's the guy who says something when he's putting on his tefillin. That's the first part. And what's the second? Why is this so apt an example? Because they're talking about an activity that has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and you did something wrong in the middle, i.e., just like building a house and dedicating it, planting a vineyard and dedicating it, engaging a wife and marrying her, right? Which are, shall we say, kind of biggies in the world of continuous actions that have to be completed in order to be considered whole. Here we're talking about also an activity that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Not every sin has a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? Stealing is stealing, right? That's one thing. But putting on the tefillin has the beginning, the middle, of it, and it's interrupted. The idea, which the other examples about the wedding, the house, and the vineyard are also activities that have beginning, middle, and end and get interrupted. So he said, no, it's not just the biggies of that, but let's take another example that also follows that pattern. And that's why I think, and I just think it's a great way of expressing, first of all, some people, let's not assume that everyone just is bothered by big or little sins. Let's not even start to talk about some people who commit big sins and they seem to have no regret or guilt. But sometimes people, it's true, you do something small and you can really feel bad about it. Okay, comments or questions about that text? Anyone? Jeremiah Cthulhu, isn't that? I mean, I really, like I said, when I found this, is wow, that's a great rabbinic concern, and a good Yom Kippur sermon is there, right? About maybe we should be also bothered by some of the minor things as well as the big ones.
Well, I think I'm assuming it's very difficult to get out of fighting a war. I don't think any young man would look forward to going into battle with the idea of being killed, even if it were a good cause. But so you have to, I guess, have very stringent reasons, and knowing you as long as I do, I knew you were a conscientious objector. You had to have very, very strong reasons that were acceptable. But when we did have a draft, everybody went. My uncles went.
When was that? Which war are we talking about?
World War II.
Okay. What happened this time a year ago? Israelis from all over the world who were not living in Israel, what did they do?
They went to Israel.
Fight in the war.
That's right. That's true.
That's
right?
very patriotic.
It shows you, as when Reuven Kimmelman says, we have all these exemptions because this allows a situation where the population doesn't agree with the government to get out of the war, and the government has to be careful about it declaring war when it knows that the people can get out of it easily and they won't be able to pursue the war. Here's an example where everyone wanted to fight, where that sense of unity and sacrifice was almost total. So that's an interesting, like I said, Kimmelman makes that point that that's not always the case. And that if you look at these exemptions carefully, you see that the rabbis of ancient times are allowing for a case where the government might be reluctant to declare war, knowing that people aren't going to show up.
Mm. Well, actually, in the case of World War II, we were attacked.
Yes.
So that did put a different slant on it. Then we ended up being all over the world, but we weren't in the beginning.
Well, again, we'll talk a little bit more about this different types of war in some of these other texts as well. Yeah, that was a defensive war. It was very clear. Good and evil were very clear there, as opposed to later on, when we know when the United States has been in some other wars, like in Afghanistan and in Iraq, where it was dependent upon volunteers.
Right.
I think it's very different when you're defending your home versus going somewhere as
Or two, he wrote a book.
Vietnam
And
to
they
fight.
had,
Okay, there's the difference between Milchemet Reshut and Milchemet Chovah, right? We'll talk about that next week. The requirements of a defensive war where you're attacked versus a discretionary war
Right.
where it is a little less compelling a case for going to war. Okay. Any other comments or questions? We're just about done.
I will miss you for the next few weeks. We will be in New Zealand, where the time would be that I'd have to get up like at 2 in the morning or something.
But if you have the recording,
Yes, if I have the recording. If
or on the other hand, you want to spend time. We would also understand if you wanted to spend time with your family rather than spending time watching the recording of my class. I would even understand that.
You'll forgive me for playing
Hey,
with my grandchildren.
I'd make the same decision. Is what I can say. And again, we thank you all. We'll see what's going on with the recording and see most of you next week. All right. I'm
Bless you all.
Mar Hatima.
Happy.
in the book of life for a
Happy
good
New Year.
year. Okay.
Are you going to contact Thorne?
Yes. When I end this, he says, pause, stop recording. So now I'm going to stop recording. Okay. I'm going to hit that button.
Yeah.
I hit it. Are you sure you want to stop recording to the cloud?